Supposed to hit the button. I'm already failing at this presentation. So I do a few things. I do a podcast about WordPress. I do a YouTube channel about WordPress. I do. Anybody from the south coast of Mass? Close to it? No? I'm the only one that drove 2.5 hours today? Beautiful.
Worcester.
All right, Worcester. Nice. So I do a show about folks down on the south coast, and then I do a random show. So today, it's really about the mindset, the confidence, and the success that one might expect to get out of a podcast or a YouTube channel. Okay? How many folks do a podcast? Sweet. What is your podcast?
Called Dusty VCR.
Nice. What's it about?
I host it with my sister and a friend. We talk about movies that we watched growing up and we revisit them.
That's awesome. Spooling through kind of thing?
Yeah.
So the mindset, the confidence, and the success, because quite frankly, the microphones, the cameras, the software, that's actually the easy part. Has anybody tried to start a podcast and just sort of said, hey, this is too much for me? No? Creating an engaging story and connecting with the audience at a very deep level, that's the hard part, and that's some of the stuff I want to focus on today. We'll talk about the technical stuff, but the idea here is to prepare you to grow that audience, cultivate an audience, and maybe find some more business. How many folks are freelancers? How many of you have jobs? So the context of this talk is if you're a freelancer or if you're working for a brand or an organization, that hopefully we can build these stories or we can present ourselves or our brand or organization, even if you're working for somebody else and they have tasked you with starting a YouTube channel or a podcast, that it aligns with some goal. Some kind of, hey, we want to find more customers. We want to grow an audience. And that's what we're going to talk about. So what does podcasting and YouTube mean to me? Really, the podcasting and the YouTube stuff are just the keywords I use to get into talks like this, right? It's just like keywords and excitement. For me, it's about relationships. It's about the channels we use to build trust with an audience or a customer. This can be done not just through podcasting. How many people subscribe to podcasts? Let's make sure we're all listening to podcasts. And how many people subscribe to YouTube? Awesome. This is one of the funny things. Like, I never used YouTube a lot. I was producing a lot of content for YouTube. I never did YouTube a lot. And then I fell into one of those terrible YouTube wormholes where I was just watching what's the guy from the UK, Graham something. He's late. Yeah, Graham Norton. I was just I just fell into the pit of Tom Cruise, and then they got into Scientology, and I was way down the bottom, and I just couldn't stop watching it. And YouTube has actually become another television channel for me lately. But the point is you can connect with a customer, you can connect with an audience, you can tell these stories, not just on podcasting and on YouTube, but through Instagram stories, through Facebook. Everything is live streaming now. Everything is some kind of micro video service. And really, when I'm talking to small business owners or other freelancers, it's a great avenue, any of these social media channels, to do this. It doesn't necessarily have to be just podcasting for an hour, interviewing somebody for just an hour, or creating a 10-minute YouTube channel video. It can be across many platforms. So I'm a big believer in the blue-collar digital worker, right? For me, I think that for us freelancers or small agency owners, developing and coding and designing is going to be something, if not already here, where this is a job that a lot of people can do, right? This is something that that getting into software development or design development is not just going to be limited to a certain few. So I ask, what is the last thing that we have left to compete with? If we're freelancers or designers, developers sitting next to one another, how do you compete with your neighbor? How do you compete with an Amazon? What is that last thing that you have left to compete with brands where you go to buy a product and it literally drops on your roof in about 25 seconds off of a drone? How do you compete with this nowadays? How do you compete with price and with value? To me, it really comes down to this digital handshake. It's what we put out into the world that people associate to us or with us. And that's what podcasting and YouTube and branding, content creation really means to me. So, selling cars to selling websites. I used to be a car salesman. That's the reaction that most people get when they say that they're a car salesman. How many people enjoy going to buy a car? Enjoy it?
Yeah.
Nice. Enjoy it? Awesome. Welcome, my friends. So this is about, I'm 37, so this is about 20 years ago. And I grew up in a car dealership family. My grandfather started one of the very first Mazda dealerships in the country way back in the 70s. And then I have 3 uncles and, of course, my dad, so there's 4 brothers that took it over, and it became a General Motors dealership, all the way from early 90s into the early 2000s, well before GM went bankrupt and the world economy collapsed. We kind of saw the writing on the wall, and we got out of that business. But the point is like I said, the dealership is located in Dartmouth, Mass., so right next to UMass Dartmouth, so about 2 hours south from here. And we weren't a very big dealership, right? But we were family owned, and we had people that worked for us for decades. Like, the only job they ever knew was working at Ralph's. Ralph's was a dealership name. That was my grandfather's name. So how do we compete against Herb Chambers, right? Mega store then, mega store now. Like, how do we compete against those types of franchises? And way back then, it was just selling on value, like it's what we hear today. Like, if you're listening to Chris Lemma, or if you're listening to, insert, content marketing genius or marketing genius in general, it's selling the value. And that's what we did as a small dealership. It's the only thing we could do. And this is at the dawn of, like, consumer internet. So this is like when people were able to look things up. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can you elaborate on selling on value? I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that right now.
Okay.
So this is at the dawn of the consumer internet, and this is when people could look up prices before dealers even knew, like, what our prices were, right? And people would print things out. When people use printers, people would print things out, and they would come in with a Kelley Blue Book, if anybody's familiar with that. And then back then they would print books with prices, and people would come this, and they'd throw it on the table and be like, I want this price. And I would just look at them and be like, look, man or woman, we're not going to war over this vehicle, right? Like, if you want to save $500, you go to Herb Chambers, because that's what you're going to do anyway, right? Everyone knows, like, the cheapest customer is always the biggest pain in the neck. Ain't no different now than it was back then. So we would have to sell on the value, and the value was family owned. You can trust us. We give back to the community. We used to have a wall of repeat customers that bought their first car from us, to their 5th car, to their kids' cars, to their kids' cars. And we were telling the story about the value of doing business with Ralph's. It's the only edge we could have. It's the only differentiator that we had. And what it did, and what podcasting can do, because this is all related, is it funneled down to the right customer. And in our case, if we're talking podcast or content creation, the right audience or the right follower. The worst thing you can do is, like, again, if you're a freelancer and you start punching above your weight and you sell a new project, and it's like, I've sold my first $50,000 website. Can't wait to go build it. And then the customer, who might be like, I don't know, AT&T, throws a 150-page legal contract in front of you, and you're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. I don't even have a lawyer yet. Creating the content, putting out the messaging, putting out the branding should hopefully find the right customer. And that's really what a podcast allows you to do, and we'll see that. I have a blank slide there. We'll see that as we move along. So if you're going to get into the content creation, these are the 3 key components that I look for. Number 1, it's the story. It's the story of who you are, where you've been, where you're going, where you're at now, past, current, present, or past, current, future. It's the character, both literal and figurative, right? So what makes up your character, and are you presenting yourself as somebody different online, which is not uncommon. And then your product and service helps define the lines of all of this content creation. So what is that goal? What are we trying to accomplish through creating content, both through a podcast or YouTube? What's the end goal? How many people are afraid to record their voice? I hate my voice.
Yeah, I hate my voice.
I hate my voice. How many people hate to film themselves? I hate looking at myself. These are all things that are true with everybody. I've been podcasting for 6 years, YouTube for 6 years. Hate it just as much as I hated it when I started. But the unique story is something that people want to hear. People will resonate with your story. As much as you think they don't care, there is somebody out there and a group of people out there that do want to hear it. Anybody ever hear E4All? They're a non-profit accelerator down in the South Coast. They have one in Lowell, and they're starting to open up more. There might be one that comes to Worcester. One of the things that we talk about as a mentor in E4All is telling your story from day zero. A lot of people are building product. They're building their service in a closet, in a basement, in a garage, in your office, in a co-working space, and you're not telling anybody about it. And then you get to market and you go to launch, and then it's just crickets. There's nobody. There's nobody to talk to. What we want to do from day zero, all the way to launch and beyond, is begin telling that story right now. Okay? So if you're looking to monetize something, you're trying to get yourself out there, you're trying to get your brand out there, and you're diligently working away on your product, pick up your phone, do Instagram story, do a live stream. I didn't put this in the slide deck, but Justin Jackson, a fairly well-known like developer marketing type of person, does this really well. He'll be like learning how to code and build his platform, but then live streaming it on YouTube. So, it throws that whole imposter syndrome thing right out the window, because he's learning how to code, he's failing in front of you, but he's teaching you at the same time, and he has a product that you might want to buy from him, a course or his podcast hosting service. So if you're like me and you deal with fighting imposter syndrome, and you're like, why am I here? Why am I talking about this? Align this with the core values of like what you're building. If you're building a product or you have a service, what is the values that you bring? And be super confident with those values and when you get your message out. And that confidence is a thread that goes throughout all of this stuff, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. People say, I don't have enough content, so what am I going to talk about? Videos in the past on VCRs, really? Yes, he's absolutely correct, because there is an audience out there for that, and they evolve. So what you're talking about for the first year eventually changes into the next year, and so on and so forth. These stories are what people really want to relate to. And it's a good thing that stories change, because it gives us new material. It shows that we're progressing through this journey. And that's how people are deep-rooted and deeply connected to your podcast. I went the wrong way. So character is the hero of the story. This is number 2. So this is the character. This is the hero of the story. This is the story grabs somebody's attention. They go, oh my God, he was a car salesman. He started a digital agency. Of course, he's an idiot. So let's just listen to what he has to say about WordPress. How could he know anything about this stuff? Character, both figurative and literal and figurative, is the hero of the story. Does anybody know who this is? Jack Black? Anyone? Does anybody know he started a YouTube channel? How many people watch his YouTube channel? Nice. Man went from 0 to like 3 million subscribers in a week. It was insane, right? Of course he's a celebrity. Of course there's some stardom there. But he's jumping on the train of esports, gaming online. How many people watch gaming online? Don't hide it. I know you're all watching Apex and Fortnite. I do. So this guy, he starts his Jablinski Games YouTube channel, all about gaming. How much gaming has he done on his YouTube channel so far? None. He has gone to arcades, like old school pinball arcades as well, and he showed us gaming from like a historic level, right, or a historic point of view. He is spending all of his time entertaining us around the concept of gaming, but it's not, ninja or Dr. Disrespect, right? This is much more of an educational and entertaining show, and he's doing a really good job portraying that character. And the character should emit confidence. How many people are really confident every time we hit publish? Not me. Story plus character equals trust. And this is something that is built up over time. It doesn't happen overnight. The stuff that I work on, I know every marketer works on, every podcaster works on throughout. This is something that is going to change. But when you're displaying your story along with your character, you're building trust with the audience member. And I have some direct quotes that we'll talk about later on. Product defines lines in the road. And this is very important because if anybody's ever started a blog, an email newsletter, the more traditional content marketing, it's a long road. It's a tough road. It takes time, right? You're not buying ads. You're not buying pay-per-click. You're putting your content out there. People are hopefully searching for it. They're finding you. Ain't no different with podcasting and YouTube. It's going to take some time. And when you have a product that you can align with, I want to make more sales, I want to get more leads, or I want to grow awareness to my nonprofit organization, when you can set something at the end of that, this stuff all makes sense. When you wake up and you're on episode 385 of your podcast, as you might know from doing it for so long, you're like, why do I do this again? Like, what's the point? Having something that you're working towards is great. So why I start, so I do a podcast called The Matt Report. It's all about WordPress entrepreneurship, or it's going to change in a little bit because I'm sick and tired of talking about WordPress, to be quite frank. But why I started The Matt Report is when I started my agency about a decade ago, I was at the local WordPress meetup with a bunch of other WordPressers, and there's people that were there that started these very big agencies today, right? 200 plus employee agencies. And there's one particular gentleman who was starting his agency at the same time. I was starting my agency at the same time. He was already in the WordPress space. He actually already had agency experience. And he brought on a very big brand, like right out of the gate. And it was just him and one other person that he had as a part-time developer. I had 2 people working for me at the time. And he said, hey, Matt, I don't have enough bandwidth to do this big project. Can I hire your team? Sign this agreement. You can't use it in your portfolio, but obviously we're going to hire you. Okay, no problem. I want to learn how to do this agency thing. So I did it. We helped him. We were in a great relationship, no problem. 5 years later, he's got 100 people. 5 years later, I have the same 2 people. I quickly realized that there was no way I was going to be able to keep up or build a business the way he was building a business. Far ahead of me, way smarter than me. He was a developer. I was a non-technical co-founder. He had the connections already. So I said, what am I going to do to make the same splash? Or what can I do to get into this WordPress community like he is? So there's a podcast called Mixergy. It's a typical like startup podcast thing. And I was listening to his thing back then, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna do what Andrew Warner does on Mixergy. I'm just gonna do it for WordPress. And that's what I started. And I started talking about WordPress entrepreneurs and I was copying exactly what Andrew Warner was doing to a fault. And one of the things that I quickly learned that through podcasting was, number one, you shouldn't just copy people exactly. It just doesn't come across the right way. And not copy, but just like, I did intros the same way. I was making up like fake sponsors, and I was like, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I'm going to talk about ROI later on in this slide deck. But starting the Matt Report in the WordPress space allowed me to find new business, connect with other agencies, and hire folks and find customers. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay? So story, character, and product. Does anybody have any questions on the mental state of a podcaster or YouTuber so far? So here are some tactics. You say, Matt, how do I get started in this? I want to get started. I want to start talking about my story. What do I do? Anybody ever heard the term cornerstone content before? So you create your cornerstone content, and you literally write out your entire story. Has anybody ever built a small business website before? For anybody? Mm-hmm. Like a restaurant or like a accountant. And they say, what kind of pages do I need on my site? I say, well, an about page would be nice. You say, great, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. write me your about page. And do they ever get it to you on time? Is it ever anything of substance? Probably not. But dip into your story and write everything out as your starting point, because we're going to pull pieces from that as we move on. The folks over at, they were 37 Signals. Now I think they're just Basecamp. Jason Fried and David. Don't remember how to say his last name. But they wrote a book called Rework, and they continuously repurpose what's going on in their business as content. And they look at their business as ways to generate revenue, not just from the product that they put out, but new ways to monetize their business. So years ago, they built a great office space in Chicago, and they talk about it in the book, and they say things like, well, we built this awesome space, we spent a lot of money doing it, but we wanted to repurpose this space as well. So we wanted to build like an amphitheater, and we would hold seminars or meetups like this or conferences, and make the business work for them in many different capacities. So they're a great example if you're looking at like repurposing your content, repurposing your business, and just looking at it from different angles. The best way, and I did this when I launched my second podcast, is to get somebody to interview you first. Okay, so if you're afraid to hit the record button, if you're afraid to get a conversation started, if you're afraid to get yourself on video and create a YouTube channel, get somebody to interview you and use that content, repurpose that content in your business or on your podcast, or just get comfortable asking questions. Super easy. Friend, family, sister, brother, cousin. Get them to interview you first and repurpose that content. Has anyone ever done like customer avatars, customer profiles? How do I know this is the right content? Number one, I think you should be really passionate about the content that you're putting out. Like you should be really into old movies on VHS tapes. It's awesome. If you're really trying to align this with growing a brand, growing a business, go back to your roots. Go back to your customer profiles. Who are they? What do they listen to? What kind of podcasts do they listen to? What groups are they in? And really get more of a marketing hat on when you're thinking about, is this the right content for the right customer or for the right audience member? And there's three that I've really, like when I sit back and I think about the podcast that I subscribe to, there's three profiles that I really resonate with. So it's either somebody who's really analytical, like they just want the numbers, they want the news, they want the information, and that's the kind of podcast or YouTube channel you're putting out. Or they want to be entertained, right? There's Stitcher and Marvel created the Wolverine podcast, right? Pretty awesome, just an entertaining show. I'm not really learning anything from it, but it's entertaining. And then there's the educational shows, and there's a whole host of them. Tim Ferriss, 6 Pixels of Separation. There's so many out there that I listen to just to learn new topics, right? So those are the three that I normally bucket listeners in. This is a screenshot of my brother's YouTube channel. And I would say that his viewers and listeners fall into the analytical category because he just does, the website's called The Trade Risk, and he talks about trading, both stocks and cryptocurrencies and things like that. But the videos that he puts out are just really analytical. They repeat whatever happened during the day, talks about the market changes, and people make decisions based on that stuff. But he's rolling out an audio podcast that he can use to connect with people a lot better, right? Tell his story, be more engaging, and not just talk about the financial trades that happened during the day. So I threw this one in here because I thought about it on the ride up. As tactic tip number 4 is maybe you can start local. This is a screenshot of episode 3 of the We Are Here podcast. This is the one that I do down on the South Coast. And for years, like when I talked about character, for years people would always say, oh, Matt's the WordPress guy. Matt does a WordPress meetup. Matt knows WordPress. Matt has a WordPress agency. People knew I had a WordPress podcast in my local market, but it didn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything anyway, right? But it doesn't mean anything in the local market because people just knew I did this stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to do something in the local market like I do on the Matt Report. So I started the We Are Here podcast, and I think it was this episode. 3 episodes in, which was like 2 or 3 weeks. I was at the coffee shop and somebody came up to me and they were like, hey, you're the guy that does that podcast. I'm like, yeah, man, Matt Report. They were like, Matt Report? What are you talking about? I was like, yeah, WordPress. And they're like, no, We Are Here podcast. And I was like, it's been like 3 days. Like, how is some people recognizing me already on this local podcast, which has literally been out 3 days, that I wasn't really even pushing that hard. And it was amazing that how people in my local co-working space quickly turned me from the WordPress guy to now the podcasting guy. So now I get people who are saying all the time, hey, you should go talk to Matt to start a podcast or a YouTube channel. So don't overlook the local market. Like if you said to somebody, a small business owner, 6 years ago, and you were like, how many Facebook likes do you have? They'd be like, what? What do you mean, right? And even today, it's still slowly catching on. But what happens is the technology finally reaches most people, and I think the number now is like 48 or 50% of households subscribe to podcasts. And now suddenly people understand what a podcast is. They get it. They can make the connection. If I said I started a podcast to my local market 4 years ago, they would have been like, I don't even know what that is, right? Might as well say RSS reader. They don't know. Numbers are wrong, but number 5 should be confidence. This is a thread that you should have throughout all of your content creation, especially when you get on the air or on audio, because I know how hard it is to, like we talked about at the top of this stuff, hate your voice, hate how you look, afraid that people don't want to listen to you, they don't resonate with your story, but they do, and you should have confidence as you push through all of this stuff. The fun part of this talk is talking about make money with this stuff. Matt, how do you make money with this? Is it possible to make money? The podcast was a great avenue when I was starting my agency, and anybody who's in freelancing or working for an agency or looking to have a slight selling advantage, you might want to think about starting a podcast. So when I was running the agency day to day, and I was just getting onto the scene of WordPress, and we were starting to get traction, and people were knocking on our door, and they would say things like, hey, Matt, your portfolio compared to this other person, they have all these big brands, you don't have anything, you have like the pizza shop down the street. Can you really build this website? And it was very easy for me at the time to just be like, hey, I have the highest rated WordPress podcast on iTunes. If you want to hear how I talk or how I interact with customers or my thinking about business, you can go watch, or you can go listen, or you could watch these videos that I have up on YouTube. It was my advantage up against the big guys, right, or the bigger agencies. It was a great way to catapult myself or the agency into getting bigger deals. And anyone can really do this. So this is my friend Jason Resnick, and this is from a comment from, I won't read the whole thing, but this is from a comment from one of my YouTube videos. And he's saying here that about 80 to 85% of his customers come in through his podcast. And that's what matters. When we talk about finding the right customer or finding the right audience, his podcast allows him to filter out all of those people that are just not the right fit for him. Okay, so if you talked about, I'll go back to you for the VHS. Hey man, you do anything on Laserdisc? Laserdisc? No, this is just VHS. This is all we talk about, right? If you had a podcast that talked about $50,000 plus projects, no one's going to knock on your door and say, hey, how about this $500 website? Or vice versa. Sponsorship deals. It's a tricky one. Anybody ever see the article recently about how much Joe Rogan is making on his podcast? It's stupid money. It's like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And it's like a 4-person setup. So sponsorships are great. It's a great way if anybody's thinking about starting a podcast, or have you ever tried to sponsor it, going to sponsor it, going to knock on like Steven Spielberg's door? No. Get this original copy of E.T. So I did this for a little while with the Matt Report, and it's something that's it's definitely viable, but it's not like knocking on the door of like ZipRecruiter or MailChimp, things that you might hear on larger podcasts. But in the WordPress space, because it's such a trust-heavy industry, there are so few podcasts out there that I was able to sell directly, right, and knock on people's doors and say, hey, I'm running a whole series. I'm running 12 episodes. Do you want to sponsor the first 6 or all 12? and I would just do that to 2 primary sponsors, and then have them pay per episode. So sponsorship deals are a great way. If you have a very, very far-reaching podcast, it can get even more lucrative. But I've had like big web hosts reach out, and it's the same thing. They send like this massive legal contract to me, and I'm like, no thanks. I would rather just work with somebody who just wants to, agree that we'll talk about this stuff on the show. But bigger deals can certainly be made. Does anyone ever see YouTube AdSense? Anybody thinking about becoming a YouTuber? On what topic?
Probably I'm going to get into programming. So I'd probably start doing Unity, Phaser, and maybe Unreal.
Nice.
And I'd probably talk about issues that I find in programs and maybe like that are made with it, that are made with those programs, and then talk about possible fixes or something, or just
Nice.
give my opinion on that.
Nice. Somebody else said YouTube?
So I work with a senior education program, and so we're looking at some things with lifelong learning.
Cool.
So probably not looking at AdSense.
Cool. Not looking at AdSense.
Right.
Going for like direct,
Yeah.
like sponsorships or deals or stuff like that.
Or really just exposure.
Exposure, getting the content out there. Nice. So I do a channel called Plugin Talk. It's a WordPress plugin tutorial channel. So fun talking about WordPress tutorials, plugins, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I started it 2 years ago. You can tell by the gap. It probably hasn't really flipped on yet, but this was the last episode I did was nearly a year ago, when I took my break. But prior to that, I ran it for like 6 months, and I was like, hey, I want to do this. I do this audio thing. Let me do this video thing. Let's see if I can make a go at it. And I started doing tutorials. I was doing them twice a week, and to the point where I did it for 6 months straight, and I was like, this sucks. This is so like, it's inspiring content. I would do some like shows, and it was sort of like crossover to the Mariport, and I was like, this isn't getting me the return that I want, like mentally, because if you ever read YouTube comments, right, they're just vile, right, and it really sucks the wind out of you. So I ran it for like 6 months, and it got to like 2,000 subscribers. I was like, I'm done, to the point where I didn't even like log into the site anymore. And I had AdSense on some of them, and this was like prior to when they changed the rules that you needed to have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours watched before you could monetize your channel. So I was getting like $5 a month, right? And I'm done. So 6 months goes by, and my AdSense goes from like $5 to $20, and I was like, that's interesting, whatever. And then I didn't look at the channel, and it was a full year after that, and I logged in because my AdSense went up to like $50, and I was like, I'm just wondering what videos are making me this, coffee shop money. And I logged in, and I had like 5,000 subscribers. I was like, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything for a year, and this has already doubled in size. And then right at the end of 2018, it was up to nearly 8,000 subscribers without uploading any videos. And AdSense was making me a couple $100 a month at this point. And I was going, maybe I'll just start uploading videos again. Maybe I'll just double down on this. And the point is with YouTube over podcasting is YouTube, obviously we all know, second or maybe the largest search engine at this point. The content that was on this channel was just very evergreen, very organic, or very SEO driven. People were searching for how to use these plugins. And I started to look at like spending time creating content and being a lot more mature than I was 2 years ago, and saying, you know what, I will reinvest in this channel, but I will only talk about the topics that I want to talk about, because maybe I can take a couple $100 and turn it into something else. And the point isn't about the money, but it is a goal, and it is something where if I switch my content to something that I'm much more engaged with, I'll have more fun with it and maybe make a little bit more money. The point of that is to show you that it is possible, right? So I didn't talk about any of the technical stuff, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. I do put out a book. It's called Podcast Starter Kit. You can get it for free, and it has all the technical stuff that you might be looking for to start a podcast. I co-wrote it with a friend of mine, Joe Casabona, who has a couple podcasts himself. We cover all the microphones, audio software, all the technical side of creating a podcast in that book, thepodcastbook.com. Check out with Nerd19. There's no email attached. I mean, you have to put your email in, but there's no follow-up email. It's not a trap. Okay? Get it for free. Nerd19. Thank you. I can talk about anything.
Are you going to keep doing the channel for WordPress, or are you thinking of
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it going.
to something else?
Yeah, so like everybody has their end of or start of year goals, and my thing is like intent. Like I want to create content for a particular purpose, and right now that channel is, hey, how can I make a little bit more money with it? Because I do have fun with it, and if it can buy more diapers for my soon-to-be 3 kids, then the better. That's right.
So you mentioned that the 48 to 50% of households subscribe to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of growth there.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how to reach people who don't currently listen to podcasts or who aren't YouTube subscribers?
Yeah, so that's been one challenge with, it's been the good and the bad with my local podcast, because a lot of people aren't podcast listeners. So, and this is why I like to start local, because, you know, when people get in like the newspaper and they're like, oh my God, I'm in the newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
right? Newspaper, it's like getting printed, it's like this whole thing that's out there. It's sort of like the same thing with this podcast, and when I partnered up with local business owners, there's a little bit of a strategy behind it. So it was like, who am I going to partner up with that is going to have potential podcast listeners? So yoga shops, coffee shops, co-working space owners, people that were sort of in that space. And the social sharing, when it's somebody that is really well known in the local market, was exponentially higher than like WordPress product owner or WordPress agency owner, right? Because these people are, you know, to the common local person who might not even know what podcasting is, it looks like a big deal. So it was something that got shared. That was one of the things I took away from doing local podcasts, that it gets amplified a lot faster.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, good idea.
Are there other ways that you like get the word out within the local area that you have a local podcast?
Yeah, so it's funny because it was like I never had business cards before. You know, these business cards, these things we print out on paper. But I started to do that a lot more, which sounds foolish, but it was something that leaving them at coffee shops was a great way to do it, because a lot of people going to coffee shops are listening to that. What I was doing at the first 6 episodes of the local podcast was doing giveaways with those owners. And that got people pretty amped up, and that grew up the email list to a few hundred people pretty quick when I first started that, and that was really fun. And again, I think, you know, again, at the local market, they want to share this information because this is something that's not common to them, right? So when I interview people for the Matt Report, these are people who are like building SaaS businesses, you know, the Justin Jacksons, Paul Jarvis of the world. Like, these people are like doing podcast tours, so this is not anything new to them. The local people, the local businesses really appreciate it a lot more, and it's actually satisfying, you know, as a host. Like, you put all this work into it, and that somebody actually retweets it or puts it in their email list. What I do for the local market is I give them a checklist of things that I say things like, it'd be great if you share this on your Facebook, put this on your LinkedIn, and I sort of prepare them to do that, where I don't do that with the Matt Report because it's very common that these people get it. And I give them the graphic that they want to share. All right, so it adds a little bit of value to them. The one flip side of that is on the local market is getting people to understand what a podcast is and how it should be produced. So Laura, who was the fitness instructor there, I pre-recorded a bunch before I put them out into the world. And she's like, I'm so excited, I'm ready to do this, this is awesome, I do listen to podcasts, can't wait to do it. And then we got on Skype, And she's like, all right, I don't have a microphone. I'm like, it's okay, you know, as long as you're in a quiet space. And we hit call, and all I hear is, go, 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 go. And I'm like, where the hell are you? She's like, oh, I'm at the cycle studio. I'm like, where's the bikes? Are you in the room with the bikes? She's like, no, it's right next door. Can you hear that? I'm like, yeah, I can hear that. And so will everyone else. I'm like, so we're going to wrap it up. This is not going to happen here. We're going to do it again. So getting the local businesses into the mindset of, like, have a decent mic. You know, if we're on video, sit in front of the window instead of, like, by a fluorescent light. So there are some challenges, like technical challenges, but yeah, people in the local market just love being interviewed. It's great.
So I like the idea that you're generating content ahead of time so that you're not on the hook every week and that sort of thing. So I heard you say you kind of write down your whole story beforehand and you kind of pluck out some like how can you tell us more about
Sure.
the process of generating interesting content on ARC?
So the Matt Report is the complete opposite. So I do it off the cuff. There's no notes. There's no preparation. The only thing I use is Calendly to book the time, right? Calendly app, for those of you that want to book times, pretty good app. But there's no, you know, people ask me all the time, hey, can you send me the notes? Can you send me the questions? There's no questions, man. Like, I just know what I want to talk about with whatever person, and I just get on the call, I do a quick introduction, and we just dive right into the topics. It's both good and bad, it's depending on who the person is that you're talking to. For general ideas, because I have a lot of ideas. I have a domain called 1000ideas.com, which I've never done anything with. And I just like wanted to use it for like ideas, like a lot of people do. One way around this, which aligns with Cornerstone content and writing out your whole story, is I just make statement documents. Statement documents. What are we in, like, corporate world? But I write out these documents, like I get this idea, crazy app idea, right? Whatever it might be. This is a really cool thing I want to explore. So I create a statement document, and I just say what it is, what's the 2-minute elevator pitch, what are the couple of features of this cool app you are thinking about at 2 in the morning, and then I write down a couple like customers that might be interested in it. Google Doc, file it away, don't touch it, go back 2 weeks, and you look it up. You know, this is the stupidest idea I have ever had, right? Dumb, right? Throw it out, delete it. So statement docs help me with these crazy ideas. For the local podcast, I will try to theme that one because that one is going to be done more in person. So because of the technical challenge that I ran into with people, not having good mics, not knowing how to connect to a good Wi-Fi, I will do themes. So the first theme was all-female entrepreneurs in the South Coast. So I was able to box the times more at my local co-working space and say, hey, if you can meet these 3 days at these dozens of times or whatever, let's just book a call and let's do that. And I sort of just get that theme out of my head, publish 6 episodes with it, and then send it out every week, right? For the next season of the We Are Here podcast, it's going to be about local restaurateurs, right? People who are building new restaurants in our area, which seem to be cropping up a lot. So I'm going to focus in on that market a lot more. Creating seasons is something that's very important to me, mentally, to keep a story arc throughout a certain set of episodes. And it made me really think of when you watch The Walking Dead, it's stupid. Why are they why are they cutting off halfway and making season A and season B? It makes you really appreciate productions like that and well, this is why they do seasons. Oh, this is a lot of work, right? So creating seasons and statement documents. For this talk, in fact, one of the things that I've done in the past for other talks is just recording myself, running through the idea, right? Not going to paper first, and just saying, turn on the camera. I do this a lot with my YouTube channel, is just turn the camera on and record, and then transcribe it. So I did 2 runs of this, talked for about 40 minutes by myself, to myself, and then just transcribed it. And that's another great way to pull out long-form content. to create some kind of like cornerstone story. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much.